into the community by inviting local community members, grassroots activists, leading researchers, and renowned scholars to join students, faculty, and staff in exploring the human rights challenges of the past year, and in striving to formulate approaches to address these issues as best we can. It is my honor to be joined by all of you to share in this week of education and problem solving, and it makes me incredibly proud, both as a student and as a Connecticut resident, to see truly how many members of our community have registered to participate in this conference during what might arguably be the busiest time of the academic year. This conference, though only in its second year, is already a testament to our community's commitment to human rights.
Thank you, Irene. Hi all, my name is Arushi Noria, and I'm honored to have been Deputy Director of the Human Rights Symposium over the past 2 years. Last year, the inaugural Human Rights Symposium featured 22 separate events that endeavored to connect UConn students and the local Connecticut community to human rights activism happening here and abroad. Not only did we host phenomenal speakers like Jelani Cobb and Connecticut's own Lieutenant Governor Susan Weissowitz, but we also tried to make services like legal advice for refugees, asylees, and undocumented persons more accessible. For this year, we tried to follow this precedent of making understanding and advocating for human rights less daunting by shaping a culture of human rights on campus. This year's conference will feature events that explore global conflicts in Afghanistan and Ukraine, among others, and will explore human rights violations in our very own communities as well. As a conference, we are proud to have supported the reinvestment of over $90,000 into the local community, and we look forward to continuing this work moving forward. We would like to take this opportunity to thank the UConn Human Rights Institute for their support of the symposium, as well as the numerous faculty, staff, and other administration who helped inform and promote our various events along the way. We are additionally grateful for all of our brilliant speakers from whom we are all about to learn so much. Thank you all.
Hi everyone, my name is Neha and I am the other Deputy Director of the Human Rights Symposium. We would like to begin tonight with a land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the territory of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Paugussett, Nipmuc, and Lenape peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. This evening, we are delighted to welcome Reverend Naomi Tutu as our keynote speaker. Reverend Tutu is the third child of Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Leah Tutu. She grew up in apartheid South Africa, and the challenges she faced growing up as a Black woman in this environment were the foundation for her life as an activist for human rights. She has served as the development consultant in West Africa and as the program coordinator for programs on race and gender-based violence in education at the African Gender Institute in the University of Cape Town. She has also served as the program coordinator for the Race Relations Institute at Fisk University and was a part of the institution's delegation to the World Conference Against Racism. Reverend Tutu has taught at the University of Hartford, Brevard College, and right here at the University of Connecticut. Tonight, her keynote addresses our shared humanity, speaking to the need to understand how our actions or inactions affect all with whom we come into contact with. Rather than focus on what separates us, she encourages us to focus on our shared humanity in order to build a just world. Both the beloved community and the proverb share an underlying theme, the importance of not dehumanizing those with whom we are in conflict, but rather on what we have the power to change. And with that, I would like to welcome to the stage Reverend Naomi Tutu. Thank you all so much for being here tonight.
Thank you all, and it is an honor to be back here at UConn. Though as I was driving on campus, I realized that I did not recognize hardly anything. It has been that long and the campus has grown that much. So I use as the basis of my presentation this evening an African proverb. The proverb says, Umtu gumtu gabantu. That is in my mother tongue, Xhosa. And in English that means a person is a person through other people. And we often hear this new phrase, or at least it's become popular, to talk about Ubuntu and our shared humanity across different platforms, that this has become something of a popular phrase in our world. And I think that often and often people throw the phrase around, talking about it as though it is something easy, or else that it is something that is completely unfeasible. So that on the one hand, people talk about Ubuntu as something that you do. My daughter was invited to speak at a high school in California, and when she got there, they had t-shirts made that said, "Do you Ubuntu?" And she thought, okay, clearly there has been a misconnection here with the theme, with the words and what it actually means. Or else, on the other hand, people say, to talk about our shared humanity is such a pie in the sky kind of idea that it has no basis in our real lives. And I respond that it is, for us as African communities, it is something that we are introduced to as children in a very mundane way. Because the proverb is saying that there is nothing that you can do for another person without in some way doing something for yourself. And in the same way that there is nothing that you can do in opposition to another person, or that oppresses another person, or that minimizes another person, without, in a real sense, minimizing yourself. And so African children in my community are introduced to the proverb in just a daily way of living. In our communities, children in a family all eat from the same bowl. And when the bowl is given, it is given to the oldest child in the group. And whichever adult gives the bowl will say to the child, "Remember, a person is a person through other people." And what they are trying to say is, as the oldest and probably the biggest of the children, you could very easily eat more than your fair share of the food. And in doing that, you would be depriving your siblings of their fair share. And that would be something against them, but it would also be something that minimizes your own humanity. That how you treat others is a testament to your own sense of self. Now, growing up, this was a proverb that my parents threw at us all the time. Sometimes with no provocation at all, it felt like. So when we would argue as siblings, my parents would say, "Remember, a person is a person through other people." Trying to say basically that as you are in conflict with your siblings, try and make that conflict one that does not get to the point of disrespecting the humanity of the others. That as you are in conflict, that make sure that your conflict does not go into abuse, does not go into violence against your siblings. Because abuse against one another is, in a real sense, abuse of yourself. It is a diminishment of your own humanity. Sometimes I would listen to that and like, sometimes they need a slap. And you telling me that this would be something that diminishes me does not feel that way right now. Or my parents would give us that proverb. I played field hockey all my way through high school and even into college. And I would come home and say to the family, "Oh, I scored the winning goal." And my parents would say, "Remember, a person is a person through other people." Meaning, if the rest of the team had not been on the field, would you have had the opportunity to score the winning goal? that you need to recognize the way in which you were supported, you were moved forward by the other members of your team. And I would say, okay, that makes sense. I did need the rest of the team. But in the final analysis, I scored the winning goal. And so this proverb was something that I heard often and often growing up. And I used to think, well, maybe it makes sense in a community where we care about one another, in a family, or in a field hockey team. Maybe it makes sense to talk about our shared humanity. But how does that make sense living in an oppressive system like apartheid? Because when I look at the reality of apartheid South Africa as a young black child, I see that white South Africans seem to suffer no ill impact because of their oppression of our community. In fact, when you look at their life and their lifestyle, it looks as though they are living a wonderful life. When you look at white communities as opposed to black communities, they have the facilities, they have the schools, they have an education system that invests in their children. They have access to free education. They have even the grocery stores that we don't have in our communities. So why would you say that oppressing somebody means that you are oppressing yourself? How real is this in the real world, in the politics that govern our country and the rest of the world? How does a proverb like that make sense? It really does sound to me like pie in the sky, like something nice, that something that you would like to be true, but is not really true. And then I came to realize that in fact, the proverb did hold honesty, did hold a lesson for our real world. And as with many enlightening experiences, the aha moment, if you like, came to me in not a way that I would have expected. You know, you always think that you're going to understand something deep in some place of quiet and some meditation on spirituality or something, or you're going to meet some great teacher who will open your eyes and show you the reality of things. But for me, the experience actually came in a rather embarrassing way. And it's embarrassing in that from the time I was 12 until I was 15, we lived in England, and my older sister and I attended an all-girls grammar school in Bromley, Kent. And this was a school, as most schools in England, where we all wore school uniform, and there were 800 girls. So you can imagine that if you're getting into trouble and a teacher comes around the corner, that all they will see will be girls in the same uniform. And so you can normally duck around the corner if they're not a teacher that actually has you in their class and get away with whatever it is that you were doing. However, in my case, as I said, my sister and I attended that school, and of the 800 students, there were 2 black students, my older sister and me. And my older sister is one of those people who was always a goody two-shoes. You know, the kind of person who always does their homework as soon as they get back from school, is always offering to help the adults, you know, offering tea, can I help cook, can I help clean? We used to call her the Saint Teresa of the can do no wrong. And every family has one. Maybe some of you watching are that painful person in your family who is always the good one. So when the teachers who didn't have me in class would see my friends and me in trouble, all they had to say was, well, the little Tutu girl was in the group. So we were getting caught quite a lot and ended up being punished. And our punishment at that time would be either the writing of lines, you know, you write 100 times, I will not, whatever it was that we were doing, or detention, and that is staying in school after school, sitting in a hall, being overseen by a teacher, and being pretty bored, particularly when you are thinking about the other opportunities that things you could be doing after school with your friends. And one day, as I was sitting in detention, it came to me that, oh, I understand what the proverb is trying to say. Because yes, here we are being punished and sitting here bored out of our minds as we have nothing else to do. But also sitting in the room with us is the teacher punishing us. And I am sure she had something better to do with her time than sit and watch a group of bored high school students. So I went home and said to my parents, I get it. This is what the proverb is saying, that whatever you do to somebody, you get something back that is of the same way. And they explained to me that, well, not quite. You're not quite getting what the proverb is saying, but you're getting there. You're beginning to understand the idea that there is reciprocity in the actions that you take. However, the teacher was not being punished, and teachers take turns. They don't have to sit in there. Not always the one who punished you is the one stuck in the room with you. But at least it's making you start thinking out of the box about what human rights abuses, how they impact the abuser as well as the abused. So I started thinking out of that box in the context first of apartheid South Africa. So as I said, initially when I thought about it, looking at white South Africans' lives, I couldn't see any evidence of the impact of their oppression of us on them, because it seemed that their lives had all the privilege and none of the suffering. But then, once I started thinking out of the box, I recognized that they too were oppressed by apartheid. And they were oppressed through fear. That apartheid gave them all this privilege, gave them all the rights that we did not have, gave them access to economic and political power, but underneath it all, they remained afraid. They remained afraid that their privilege would be taken from them. They remained afraid that Black South Africans would rise up and do to them what they were doing to us. And it didn't matter what they did in the context of apartheid, they stayed afraid. It didn't matter that they armed themselves. It didn't matter that they built higher and higher walls around their homes. It didn't matter that they conscripted all young white males into the military. It didn't matter that they kept coming up with laws to tamp down on any kind of resistance against apartheid. It didn't matter that they kept arresting people. It didn't matter that they banished people. It didn't matter that they tortured. It didn't matter even that they killed people who fought against apartheid. It never could take away their fear. Their fear was of such an was so immense that they could not even allow themselves to question apartheid. that any white person even that raised even a slight question about the alrightness, the okayness of apartheid had to immediately be silenced. Whether it was through banishment, whether it was through imprisonment, whether it was through banning, or whether it was even through murder. That they lived in such fear that nothing they did could free them from that fear. Because the fear was based on their oppression of us. And so while Black South Africans were indeed oppressed by apartheid, at least we recognized our oppression and were fighting to end it. White South Africans were also oppressed by apartheid, but they were actually fighting to maintain that oppression. And so their understanding of their freedom was a freedom guarded around by fear. Their privilege was a privilege that was built on fear. So once I started looking not at the ways in which the world might talk about oppression in the context of apartheid South Africa, it made me look around the world to see the ways in which oppressors in fact oppressed themselves. And once I started looking, it became actually quite almost like a game to look and see how do we see oppressors suffering in this context as opposed to that context. What does oppression of themselves look like in different contexts? And I'll share just a couple that came to me as I looked around. So we know about the oppression that Saddam Hussein imposed on the people of Iraq. And when he was deposed, then we got a chance to see all the wonderful palaces that he and his family had. And it looked, again, when you looked at it, it was like this family and the people around him were living a splendid life, were living a life of luxury in the midst of the oppression and suffering of the Iraqi people. And then we found out that Saddam Hussein had to have body doubles, that he had people who looked something like him, who were sent out to different parts of the country so that people didn't know whether it was Saddam Hussein in that car, whether it was Saddam Hussein visiting that part of the country, whether it was the real Saddam Hussein in that palace or a body double. Now that might seem like a small thing, but put yourself in that position. How oppressive is it to have people pretend to be you? How oppressive is it to realize that with all the luxury that you live in, you are so hated by the people that you are governing that you cannot step out freely into the country that you control? What is the good of that control when you yourself are not free to be free? When we look at our world, we often see that it seems those who oppress, those who marginalize others seem not to suffer any consequences. And often, looking at it through the lens of our world, the lens that tells us that wealth, that money, that opulence is the measure of your worth as a human being, that by that standard, yes, maybe those who oppress seem to live wonderful lives. But the reality is that you cannot simply live based on your wealth. We see that when the example that I have given, whether it is Apartheid South Africa or Saddam Hussein's Iraq, that the reality is that our humanity is intertwined with the humanity of all those we interact with. It is a lesson, as I said, that my parents tried to teach us. It is a lesson that that proverb tries to teach. It is a lesson that often seems impossible for us to take on. So I want to share a few stories from my own life, from ways in which, in small ways, I have come to recognize our shared humanity. The first is of my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who was a domestic worker for all of her life. And when I was growing up, was a domestic worker in Krugersdorp, which is the town that I was born in and that my parents grew up in. And when we would come and visit her, we would often arrive in time to pick her up from work. Now, in our culture, age in and of itself bestows respect. That we understand that just the fact of somebody having lived longer in this world gives them a place of respect in our perspective. So, for instance, in our community, we do not even call our older siblings by their first names. That anybody older than you put an honorific in front of their names. An honorific that means usually big sister or big brother or big mother or little mother or aunt, but that there is always an honorific placed in front of the name of somebody, even if they're only a couple of years older than you. So you can imagine then that for us, my grandmother, people of my grandparents' generation, for me as a young person, those were people of great wisdom, worthy of respect for their experience, for the lives that they had lived, for the care that they showed us. And so I never, ever thought of calling my grandmother by her first name. And I remember one time picking her up from her employers and hearing the children of the house, who were about my age from what I could tell, calling her by her first name, telling her all the things that they needed her to do before she left for the evening. And I got so angry. I was so angry. I was angry with them for disrespecting my grandmother, but I was also angry with her for allowing that disrespect. And so when she got in the car, I said to her, how can they talk to you that way? And how can you allow them to talk to you that way? What does that, how do you even allow them to call you by your first name? And my grandmother looked at me and said, I want you to remember that your worth as a human being is not based on how others treat you, but on how you treat others. And at that time, I was unwilling to give up my anger. And I was like, that's all very well, that's nice and easy for you to say now. But the truth is that they have disrespected you and you have allowed that disrespect. But as I grew older and started listening to those words, especially once my grandmother had died, I realized the wisdom in those words. That the wisdom in those words came again from that proverb that I had got so sick of hearing from my parents. But that idea that how we walk in the world is what we are judged on. It is not how others treat us. It is how we walk in the world. That is the measure of our humanity. And therefore, we are called, we are challenged to look at those, particularly those whom we know as other, particularly those with whom we are in conflict, and ask ourselves, what is their story? What is it about them that we don't know? What is it about them that they could tell us if we gave them the space? What is it that we could hear from them if we listened to their story in their own voice, in their own words? And often we decide that we know people because we know one aspect of their story. One of my powerful learnings in this way has been around the issue of Palestine. That often we would have reported on the news a suicide bombing by a Palestinian. And then they would find out who this bomber was and would go and interview his mother or his wife or his sister. And very often the woman, the mother would say, I am proud of my son for what he has done. And our news story is about the inhumanity of Palestinians, that what kind of a person is proud of their child for killing themselves and murdering others. And then I realized that that was the only time we ever got to hear from Palestinian women their story. The only time we as a world paid attention to the Palestinian story was when we were raising up somebody to show what kind of a person would be proud of their child for murdering others. That we never got to hear the story of that Palestinian woman or of that child who became a suicide bomber before that event. And I started asking myself, what would take somebody to that place? Because I don't imagine that any mother after giving birth, and I say this as somebody who has given birth, and I can tell you that after going through labor, I hold that over my children's head, first of all. That, do you know how long I was in labor? Do you know how I suffered for you? But that how after all that when you look at that child, that you would say, My dream for you is that one day you will grow up to kill yourself and other people. That is not a human experience. So then one has to ask, what is the story that leads you from the place of looking into your baby's eyes and dreaming of the life your child will live to a place where you say, I am proud that my child has killed themselves and others. But because we never hear the story before then, we are able to dehumanize, to have a story about Palestinians, to have a story about their humanity, to have a story about how they are in the world, that takes one incident and makes it their whole story. Let me bring it maybe closer to home. I know most of you are probably too young to remember when this country went through so-called welfare reform. But when we did that, there was a whole conversation around why welfare reform was necessary. But do you know who was not part of the conversation? It was those welfare recipients. That we as a country decided that we knew welfare recipients. And there was that whole thing about this welfare queen who was buying steak and lobster with food stamps, who kept having babies so that she didn't have to work and was living a wonderful life on the taxpayers' largesse. And that was the story that was used to justify a system reform that marginalized, pushed more people into poverty, that really increased the suffering of the poorest in this country. The reason that we were able to have that conversation without talking to those who were most impacted by the change is because of the story we had told each other about who welfare recipients were. Because we knew who they were, we decided that we didn't need to hear from them, because that there was nothing of value that they could add to this conversation around welfare reform, because they were not responsible adults in the way that the rest of us, hard-working taxpayers who never got to eat lobster and steak, were. That is how we separate ourselves and then can watch the oppression, can watch the marginalization of others, because we decide we know who they are. We know their story. We know what they bring to the table, and we don't believe that they bring anything of value. We stand at a time in this country and around the world where we are seeing more and more people demonizing, people denigrating, people dehumanizing other human beings. Whether it be because of their race, whether it be because of their gender identity, whether it be because of their sexual orientation, whether it be because of their religion, but that we are finding ourselves in a world where the denigration of those whom we know as other has become an acceptable political discussion. It has become acceptable action. It has become acceptable to judge and decide that we know the amount of humanity that any specific person is worthy of because of a label that we give them. And the truth is that kind of political system can never build community. It can never empower even those who are at the forefront of dehumanizing others. Because, as the proverb says, you cannot dehumanize another human being without bringing your own humanity into question. So we are challenged right now in this country, right now around the world, as more and more so-called political leaders build their leadership, build their platform on dividing us based on those many things that I talked about: race, religion, gender identity. That so many are building their political identity on the othering, on the dehumanizing of those whom they have decided are other. We see it in our social media. We hear it in our news reports. We see it in lives lost in this country to gun violence. We see it around the world in anti-immigrant rhetoric, that we are seeing a move to a populism that is based on dehumanization. So if we see that, and if seeing that concerns us, then we have no option but to be the ones who speak out for humanity, speak out about our shared humanity, speak out saying that our differences are not reasons to hate. Our differences bring into our community a wealth of gifts that we would not have if we were all the same. That it is, in fact, in the different experiences, the different perspectives, the different challenges, the different gifts that we bring to our communities from our differing life experiences that will enable us to face the challenges that we face as a world. Whether it be the challenges of climate change or the challenges of forced migration around the world. That only when we listen to one another and listen to the different perspectives, to the different views, that we give voice to our story and allow those whom we know as other to give voice to their story. That is the only way that we can survive as humanity. I like to tell people that, did you notice that when we were locked down during COVID, how our earth regenerated itself? Did you see how the skies became clearer, the waters became clearer, animals that hadn't been seen in places were once again seen in the oceans and on land, animals and sea animals that we had not seen, but now they became replenished in our absence. And for me, the lesson of that is that there might come a time when the rest of creation says to us, you are the problem, and we want to get rid of you. And we will continue to be the problem as long as we look at one another and see simply problems, and rather than looking at one another and seeing other human beings who might offer us a way out of the dilemma that we face. That when we build our communities based on keeping someone out or shutting off the voice of this group or closing that group out of the opportunities, we are closing off possible paths for our own growth, for our own wholeness, for our own and creation's healing. The only way that we can move forward as a human society is by paying attention to and respecting the full humanity of every human being on this planet. That it is in respecting the humanity of those who don't look like us, of those who don't worship like us, those who speak different languages than we do, those whose communities are organized differently than ours. That it is only when we sit and give voice to all of the differing ways that human beings live, survive, and thrive in this world, that we give ourselves an opportunity to truly survive and thrive. We are only human in our relationship with other humans. So I ask you that as you carry on this symposium this week, and as you walk around campus or go home, as you prepare for exams, as you encounter people different from yourself, that you remember that a person is a person only through other people. That it is our shared humanity that makes us human. Thank you. Thank you. So I understand that there are questions that will be, okay, all right, I'm just gonna listen.
Thank you so much for your keynote. It was absolutely illuminating and inspiring. We're unfortunately a little bit short on time, so I will just ask.
Yeah, I'm a priest, so I tend to preach. Sorry.
So I'll just ask what's probably the most frequently asked question. So what advice do you have for the young human rights activists right now who are watching? How do they move to create a more just and equitable world?
Yes, yes. So, in fact, you know, I am in awe of young activists. When I look at what young people have taken up, the different challenges that young people have taken up, whether it be climate change, racism, economic empowerment, I stand and want to bow in front of you. But the advice that I would give is that to recognize that every single issue that we struggle around for human rights is connected to every other issue that we struggle about human rights. So whether you identify racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, whatever it is that you identify as the place that you want to place your energy, know that it is connected to the larger struggle for human rights. So don't feel guilty about your focus, because we need a focus to be able to do the work. We need to find the place that our passion meets the world's need. So I always tell my children, it doesn't matter what it is, what issue it is that you identify. Just make sure that it is one that you are completely passionate about, because the obstacles in your path are going to be many. That there will be times when you are struggling and it feels as though you are just banging your head against the wall, that you don't see any change happening. You don't see the change that you are working for happening in the world around you. And that if you are not passionate about the issue, then you will get burnt out and you will want to give up. I mean, you'll want to give up sometimes anyway, but if you're not passionate, then you will give up. But that if you find something that moves your spirit, that lets you know that this is something that I am willing to stand for, it is something that I want to fight for, that this is the issue that I will work on. Take that issue up. Make that issue your own. And having done that, build around yourself a community of people active in a similar way. They don't have to be active in the same issue, but active in a similar way, passionate in a similar way, so that when those days of banging your head against the wall happen, and they will happen, that you have a community of people who will remind you why you are in this struggle, and who will remind you how important your work is, and who will remind you how important you are, you as a human being, and who will remind you that sometimes it is okay to step away from the struggle and just take a moment to breathe, to cry, to bang your head against the wall, to knock cushions, to watch trashy movies, to eat lots of chocolate. That you will have that community that will remind you that stepping away does not mean that you have given up the struggle. It means that you recognize that you are human too and need care and to be cared for. So find the issue that you are passionate about. Find the community that will remind you and care for you, and also you care for you. Make sure that you build into your work of struggle time for yourself.
Thank you.
I guess we're out. Are we out of time?
Unfortunately, we are.
Thank all so much for joining us, and thank you to the hosts of this symposium for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry. I got carried away.
We're going to take a really brief break while we set up for our next panel, which will be on food insecurity.
you like don't need that chair there, it's because the
Yeah,
panels didn't
that's
show.
fine.
And if you all want to sort of like space down so that you
Yeah.
can fill it out, because the frame basically gets you like this, so.
Oh, okay, so it's like
Yeah,
that.
so that way
Okay, yeah, we
it's
can move
down.
down.
Yeah, two.
I'm scared.
Do two mics. You want me to get rid of this one? Yeah, okay. I think should be good to go, right?
Yes, we're all set. Ready? Okay. All right, perfect. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for coming tonight. We're now going to move to our panel on food insecurity. So at UConn, food insecurity affects an estimated 35% of students just at UConn stores, and even more at regional campuses. So this issue is incredibly pertinent. So first, I'd like to ask the panelists to introduce themselves and give a brief overview of their roles at UConn and what they are currently working on in terms of initiatives. So we'll start with Ethan.
Hi everybody, my name is Ethan Warsler. I am a senior studying political science and communications. I am the vice president of the undergraduate student body and undergraduate student government. I've served in a host of leadership positions across the university and pursued various advocacy initiatives relating to food security. I've done so as the food security coordinator at USG. I've done so on the UConn board of trustees, serving as a store representative. And I'm super excited to be with you all today. And thank you for allowing me to be here.
Hello everyone, my name is Kara Jackson. I am a graduate student here in the sociology department. I actually wear a couple of hats. I'm the vice president of the graduate employee union, and I also am an instructor here where I teach sociology. So I think that through these different roles that I kind of play, I have some pretty interesting perspective being a student, but also representing student workers and also having students in my class who have been experiencing these issues. As a sociologist, I am very passionate and interested in studying inequality, particularly issues such as food insecurity, which is a prevalent issue across college campuses here in the United States and particularly at UConn. So I'm very excited that we have this opportunity to talk about such an important issue tonight.
Hi everyone. Oh, can you hear me? Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Srimai. I'm a junior student of political science and business management here at UConn. And I'm also a pre-law student, hoping to go to law school eventually and work on issues of social justice. Here at UConn, I'm involved in a number of different places on campus. I try to do a little bit of everything. I'm involved in the Unicef Campus Initiative, which works on helping children around the world, especially in areas of poverty and war and situations that are really difficult. And here in this food insecurity space, I was the campaign coordinator of 2 food and housing insecurity campaigns, the Hunger and Homelessness campaign, which was very involved in working on the Husky Market program, which we'll hear a lot about today, and also the Food and Housing Equity Project, which started the Student Needs Survey, which is currently going on, and it's collecting different responses from a number of students. I think we're at like 400 students right now on different areas of student needs related to food and housing insecurity and more. So I'm involved in a lot of different places and really happy and excited to be here.
Perfect. So we're going to move into our first question, and we'll kind of do it similar to introductions. I'll say the question, and then we'll move down the line, but you can obviously feel free to talk to each other, to interject as you want. So the first question is, in what ways have you engaged with the issue of food insecurity while at UConn, whether that's in classes, activism, employment, personal experiences, etc.? And through these experiences, how have you seen food insecurity impact students? So start with Ethan.
So it's a great question. When I first came to UConn, not much was being said about food insecurity, at least on the administrative level. I feel like the consciousness of the issue was very low, and actually the only reason why it rose any significant bit is because of the hard work of UConn students, 2 in particular I remember, Wawa Gather and Abhishek Gupta. My freshman year, they really were the only ones telling it how it was at UConn, and that students were hungry, and they needed food, and that UConn, the existing UConn services weren't enough. And they created a pop-up food pantry model that was very inspiring to me. And my freshman, sophomore year, I learned a lot from them and created what would then go on to be Husky Market with a bunch of other wonderful co-founders. It was a super huge collaborative effort. A lot of awesome people, including Will Shad and various other undergraduates made it all possible. And through my time here the past couple of years, I've seen the needle shift. And I'm very happy to see that shift because fundamentally issues are not addressed if UConn and the people who make, really at the end of the day, the big decisions aren't aware of those issues. So I'm very grateful to see that needle shift and in favor of really statewide, at least recognition, if I know support's on its way, but at least recognition that food insecurity is a big issue. We saw that the state of Connecticut, I think a couple of years ago, 2018, I believe it was, I don't remember the exact day, the exact year, but maybe Shrima can remind me, but passed a law in the state of Connecticut, which as a UConn student I was so happy to see, basically mandating all public schools to conduct a full survey of all food insecurity, of food insecurity on every campus across all the public schools in Connecticut, universities in Connecticut. And seeing the results of that, which many students already knew to be true, but seeing it in an actual document, seeing it in a survey, valid results was exactly what UConn needed and what students needed to create various other programs, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on. But that's sort of been the path, and I know the trajectory is, I think, very positive. And I'm very excited to see the next generation of UConn student activists and their various pursuits of equity on campus and bringing about a food secure campus. But anyways, I went on. I'm happy to pass the mic here.
So weighing in on this, I think that I kind of have a varied perspective, somewhat from a personal experience and then my sociological one. So I'll kind of explain what I mean by that. I've been a graduate student here at UConn for the last 7 years, and I'm a first generation student. And so when we look at a problem like food insecurity, one of the first things a sociologist is interested in understanding is, okay, what are the demographics attached to an issue like this? What's driving this? I like to reverse engineer problems, that's what I call it, but trying to figure out, okay, where exactly does this social problem stem from? What kind of mechanisms are causing such a problem to be reproduced? And so something like class status or racial categories, international status, these different social locations, which is essentially kind of your social identity, the kind of location you occupy, if you will, it has a tremendous influence on the likelihood that a student would potentially experience something like food insecurity. So when I was in undergrad, I wish that there were such passionate, innovative, dedicated students working on issues such as food insecurity and housing insecurity, because I just thought that it was part of the course. So what that looked like and for myself for the last 7 years has been a struggle. There's a real struggle when you don't know how you're going to be able to make ends meet and you have to kind of figure things out, right? So I think with the pandemic recently, they have lifted some of the policies, for instance, surrounding food stamps for students. But if you're a student that's more than half time, you previously were not eligible for food stamps in Connecticut. So kind of policies like that could make it complicated for students to get assistance. I always teach my students that the personal is political, and the sociological imagination allows us to make connections between what might seem like our personal issue, something as seamlessly as like, what am I gonna eat tonight? Can I have quality, accessible, healthy food? Into something that's like, wow, this is not just my problem. This is actually something that many a student who is trying to balance their academic duties along with kind of their survival may face. And so that's So in terms of the personal, that's something that I began to experience, and I realized with a sociological background, I really am passionate about this. That's in my wheelhouse is where I try to encourage my students to think, okay, what are the lines of inequality that allow an issue like this to continue to go on? As a vice president, I feel at UConn, my engagement has also been pretty active in thinking about issues like this, because we think about, okay, when we think about our students or our graduate workers, we're not just thinking of kind of like a uniform person. We have to think about the different backgrounds we occupy. We are such a diverse body, meaning we have diverse issues. And we recently were bargaining for our next contract, very exciting stuff. The university and our union came to an agreement. And one of the issues that we considered was something like food insecurity when we thought about negotiating for higher salaries. And better benefits, and our compensation and benefits are so key to the livelihood of our workers. And so this was something that we really indirectly were kind of encompassing when we were thinking about what our workers need in order to have, their, what is the word I'm looking for? Their quality of life kind of ensured and met. So at UConn, I feel that there has been a lot of work. There's still a significant work to go, especially when we think about these very vulnerable populations. So who are our first generation students? And essentially, if a student finds themselves in a marginal position, how may that exacerbate an issue like food insecurity? And I think questions like these are so important. And in my classes, I've encouraged my students to think about these things, and I also try to translate that into my own teaching, being mindful of the baggage, if you will, that your students bring in, kind of the hidden curriculum, right? So we know our students have to prepare for tests, but there's a hidden curriculum when you also have to be able to figure out what you're gonna eat, figure out how much money you're gonna have for the month, and try to budget that accordingly so that you can, get your needs met. And this inevitably can put so much stress and strain on students. And so I think too, there's an awareness among my colleagues too that I work on trying to raise to get us to be mindful that not all students come into the classroom with the same backgrounds, and we should, I think, exceptional educators are kind of on thinking about this strategically, having some foresight to recognize what their students' needs are and anticipate those. And while unfortunately we can't feed our whole class, we can certainly be accommodating and understanding and be resources to say, hey, have you heard about such and such a program, or have you talked to the student support services to try to make sure they're not alone, because often so many students feel that they're alone and they don't necessarily maybe advocate for themselves. And that's such a huge part of this, is knowing that you can advocate for yourself and that there are resources here on our campuses. I said a bit there, so I'll pass it on.
I think that my experiences or understanding of food insecurity is a lot more similar to Kara's experiences, in that it's more personal. I am a first-generation American. My family's from India, and seeing poverty, homelessness, hunger on such a real and massive scale in another country kind of gives you a different perspective on food insecurity from a really early age, right? Because you see these things that, in a way, you become really desensitized to seeing things that many people, you'll see in documentaries, and they'll really move you and sit with you and make you feel like a type of way for a day. And to live in an atmosphere like that made me aware from a really young age of the privileges that I have to not be in a situation like that, to be able to come to a different place, to see such a different world, to have the opportunities that I have. And that has really inspired my activism throughout my entire life, and my kind of passion for community service in a number of different areas, which is obviously, I've mentioned it with Unicef, but specifically in food insecurity, that's just a real personal experience for me that has always grounded my work. And coming to UConn, this is a great university. This is an amazing place to be. People have such great things to say about UConn. And to meet students who experience food insecurity here at UConn in such a different world is unacceptable to me. It's like that is what motivates all of the student leaders here who are sitting here, is this idea that we can't settle for that. We can't settle for food insecurity here at one of the best universities in the country. And there is infrastructure all across the nation in a number of different universities that protects students who experience food insecurity and helps them. And these are institutionalized ways of providing for students. And I think that there's a need for that here at UConn. I think, like Ethan mentioned, like there has been a shift in that people are listening, and people, especially like the news and like administration, people are listening more and they want to hear what we have to say more. And I think that we're in a really critical place in time where we can capitalize on that and push forward more initiatives, more programs, more all these ideas that student leaders on campus have to change what food insecurity looks like and eventually become a completely food secure campus. I mean, it's completely feasible, and it comes with the kind of understanding that Kara talked about of demographics of food insecure students, right? Because people have this idea about food insecurity and housing insecurity that it's like you have nothing to your name, like you are like living like at the bottom. And that's not what food and housing insecurity look like for a lot of people who experience food and housing insecurity, right? Like students experience food and housing insecurity in so many ways that don't match our preconceived notions or stereotypes about food and housing insecurity. Like the kid who has to work like literally 9 to 5 or 9 to 10 or something like that, has to work really long hours to be able to pay for rent and can't eat a meal in that time, that person is food insecure. The students who can't afford better groceries than ramen or $1 packets of food, those students are food insecure. Like this is what food insecurity looks like here on campus for so many students. And for most students, it's unconscious, right? You don't understand that that is what that is, that that's food insecurity. And there has to be like a narrative shift to accepting food insecure students, accepting their experiences, having conversations about those experiences and moving forward, right? Because like, it's so much more common than we think. It's not something that's like, there's this one small portion of the student population that experiences food insecurity. Like Neha mentioned, 35% of STORE students here, like think about that. 35% of the people that we come into contact with on a daily basis are food insecure in some way. So I think that, you know, experiencing that kind of narrative shift and having those conversations is the way that we move forward, especially in this time where people are listening more.
Thank you. All three of you made such amazing points. So one of the problems with food insecurity initiatives is that a lot of students simply aren't aware of their existence, and they're not really reaching the students that need them. So for the students watching right now, what initiatives, services, or programs do food insecure students have access to at UConn?
Wow, well, it's a great one. I'll take a stab at it, and I'm sure my Kara will be able to help me out. So first, I also wanted to mention too, I wanted to push back on some of the premise of the question, which is that students don't know about it, so they can't get access to it, and that's the gap. And there is supposedly, you know, a bountiful amount of resources to come to should students just simply know about it. And there are so many awesome programs that UConn, State of Connecticut has in store. But a lot of it is students who know about the programs don't think it's right for them. So they don't feel like they fit in that category. That they wouldn't be eligible, they wouldn't qualify, there's people who need it more. That's one bucket of people. And there's a bucket of people who financial aid deems as not worthy at all. Financial aid deems them as their parents make too much money, and while maybe the FAFSA and all that doesn't quite truly visualize or truly represent how much money they actually have, maybe their parents don't support them much at all at college, they get kind of lost with everybody else. So those are two reasons why students wouldn't access in the first place. I'll mention I think this may be a fine opportunity to plug USG and Praxis's own program, which is Husky Market. Husky Market was started a couple years ago by UConn students. It is 100% funded by UConn students. It is organized by UConn students, undergraduate students, and it essentially is simple as this. A student at the beginning of the semester can sign up for a Husky Market gift card, which is just a gift card to Price Chopper, Stop & Shop, or Big Y, for $300. but hopefully by the end of the semester or beginning of next semester, they'll get that card. There's a whole bunch of work we have to go through to get them that card. But they'll be able to take that card and go to any grocery store that they choose, Big Y, Stop Shopper, Price Chopper, and be able to purchase $300 worth of groceries. Full stop. And a lot of other programs, there's strings attached, there's paperwork you have to fill out. It's a simple 5-minute application. And every single person who applied last year, who filled out the application and was a UConn student, received that. And in last semester alone, UConn, USG, and Praxis, and our regional governments, was able to give out 1,000 gift cards to 1,000 students, well over 1,000 students, excuse me. And that's just one example of something that UConn has to offer, students have to offer. And UConn watched and helped us do that, but truthfully it was a UConn student production.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to pass off on any other UConn specific resources maybe. And yeah, thank you.
I will say, just because Ethan mentioned Husky Market, and it covers all the regional campuses in the last semester that we ran it, which is one of the most important things to mention about it, because UConn has other campuses besides the store campus, and their experiences are often lost and not validated or heard as much as STORE's campus students. And really, these issues that we're working on, food and housing insecurity, affect the regional campuses more than the STORE's campus. That is what the research has shown. And to be able to work with them and partner with their undergraduate student governments who stepped up and who contributed their own funds to this program to help their students was really such an amazing, as Ethan often says, a realization of student power. My favorite thing to say. And I think that that is one of the most amazing things about Husky Market, but I think that Ethan kind of alluded to it. There is a lack of infrastructure and programs available for food insecure students here at campus, here on our campus, and that's something that student activists in this space are constantly working on, constantly actively having conversations in random meetings about what if we did this? What if we tried this? How can we work around and support students in ways that are tangible and real and the same level as Husky Market, which was an amazing thing. And I also think that there's a lot to be said about the community. I think that this community has a lot of soup kitchens and food pantries available, and I don't have the list of them anywhere, but I think that if you look into the resources available in the larger Connecticut community, you'll find that there's a lot of people who are there to support you and a lot of communities that are there to support you, and there's a lot of great work happening here in Connecticut that is definitely worth being noted. I think that's all I have on resources available to students.
So, okay. So my thoughts on this is thinking, about the knowledge, right? The accessibility in terms of, do students know what exists? And I think that that's where there could be an improvement going off of the infrastructure is when you are, whether you're a student or a grad student, when you're arriving to a campus, whether you've been on the campus for 2 years, if you don't know what you don't know. And so I think that transparency and communication and something that's literally built into a process is going to be one that's most efficient for reaching the population that we wish to assist. And so while I think there are definitely resources out there in terms of those who don't know, I think that there's probably a good reason why, right? I love surveys. I love trying to dig and figure out, okay, so what exactly is causing this lapse in information, for instance. And I think there's so much that can be done in terms of orientations or when students are just getting onboarded. We have to register for our classes every semester. And so there's so much opportunity to think about the ways that certain types of very important information, especially financial information, if you think about your financial life, could be better communicated in terms of finding out the existing resources. Then there's still the gap of probably the resources that maybe do not exist yet, or that truthfully I'm unaware of, because this is probably a silly question, but does the Husky Markets only support undergrads, is that correct? Or does it support grads as well?
Yes.
Just undergrads, because it's the undergraduate student fee that pays for it, so unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh no, and I think that's wonderful that the undergrads have organized this, and I think it's inspiring work for graduate students to pick up as well. Because when we go back again to those demographics, it's those unique kind of set of characteristics that may put, for instance, when a graduate student is food insecure, it may not just be the student, it may be their whole family. And so we start to kind of think about these issues very differently. I even think about that the regional students as well, those students are less likely to have on-campus housing. So then while we're thinking about those students, we may also be thinking about their whole families. And then the question is, are their families even educated of like the actual services that Connecticut may be providing? But again, those things can be kind of limited, hence, class struggles, right? Like the very real challenges that come with having financial strain. And so I think this is a great question, one that I think we can continue to kind of think about. If you don't know what you don't know, how do you really start to bridge that gap and find transparent ways to advertise resources, but also think about again, like for instance, the graduate students, how we can maybe even create some of those resources, because I'm not sure if they're actually as existent.
So I just want to take the opportunity for any folks who are watching, UConn students who are watching, who they themselves may be food insecure, real quickly, if you're interested in finding out more resources, you can go to the UConn Praxis Food Housing Equity Project website. Just look up UConn Praxis, it's Praxis, Food and Housing Equity Project. There's a whole bunch of resources right here. It's actually a wonderful page that I believe Shrima had a role in playing and created. And they're on-campus, off-campus resources. In terms of on-campus resources, there's something called Yukon Swipes, which is put on by, I believe, the Dean of Students' offices. You essentially fill out an application, you apply for, essentially it's a commuter plan, which is 25 meal swipes to our dining halls on campus. I believe this is a course just for Stores campus, just because the regional campuses unfortunately don't have access to those dining halls. But you can apply through UConn Swipes. It's sort of, the money comes from the Student First Fund, which is privately funded. So if you are watching and you're interested in helping food insecure students by donating, you can go to the UConn Foundation and donate to the Student First Fund. It's the best way to tangibly benefit the existing UConn students with your donation. Also, there are numerous local, I shouldn't say numerous, there are local food pantries offered by, so essentially community kitchens, food pantries offered by local faith-based charitable organizations around, as well as, of course, SNAPs, which SNAPs is a little difficult for UConn, full-time UConn students, but please see if you're eligible. The link to go to SNAPs, to Husky Market, to UConn Swipes, they're all online at the website I mentioned, the UConn Food and Housing Equity Project. So I just wanted to put that up.
No, thank you.
One last resource, since Ethan brought up the website, and I know what's in the website, there's also a lot of information about the Dean of Students office, which is what UConn posits as the primary resource for students experiencing any type of insecurity. So the Dean of Students office is always available for people who are especially in need of emergency relief. They have a number of different emergency relief loans and funds and things like that. So the Dean of Students office is a very critical place here on campus for students experiencing food, any kind of insecurity really. So just wanted to mention that as well.
Yeah, thank you. So for our next question, what are some challenges you faced in supporting food insecure students since UConn has returned to in-person learning? And what are some challenges that you anticipate facing in the near future?
So it was interesting because I think I would just start and I'll go down, unless you want to go. Okay. I'll be brief. So I'll try my best to be brief. Interesting enough, when we were all in person before COVID was even a thought in our minds, USG had put together a sort of a pop-up food pantry, donated a couple $1,000s worth of groceries, and the student union handed it out. It was a bit of a disaster because 300 people showed up, and it was way too crazy. So we learned from that, we collected our thoughts, we said, you know what, we're gonna go bigger this time, we're gonna get thousands more dollars worth of groceries in a bigger room, it's just gonna be a smoother operation. And then sure enough, COVID hit, and we weren't able to do that. So the thing is, though, us going online and us everyone being sent home, food insecurity doesn't stay here at UConn, it follows you back home. And so we had to think of an alternative way to run Husky Market, a bigger way to run Husky Market, and actually the conditions of COVID made it easier for us to do that, and allowed us to think outside the box and create what we now know to be Husky Market, which is the gift card program. So not just tangible groceries, but giving students the agency to, with that gift card, to go out and get the food they need. So the online model allowed us to develop a program that was asynchronous, completely contactless, that was able to reach a student wherever they are in the state of Connecticut or beyond, because we mailed them the cards, or if they wanted to pick it up, they could. And also, super importantly, which is some of the shortfalls of an in-person food pantry, accommodate dietary and religious dietary restrictions. So all of those factors together were sort of considered in creating our program. And now that we're back in person, we still do the Husky Market gift card, but when we're thinking about the future, we're having to unfortunately reconcile with changing financial aid rules that allowed us during the pandemic to distribute more financial aid. The federal government and the state of Connecticut said, okay, you guys are good to give out the gift cards because you're able to attribute it to financial aid, attribute it to an increase in your, quote, estimated cost of attendance, which is such as the number that UConn and the federal government chooses, decides to figure out how much it costs to go to school. We were able to increase that number and allow us to distribute the aid to a student without it impacting their existing financial aid. But now that COVID is supposedly ending, God willing, we have to rethink our model and figure out how to change fundamentally, which is a financial aid distribution model, into something else that UConn doesn't consider financial aid, because we run into a whole bunch of issues with a bunch of people who are way smarter than me, but a bunch of rules with federal regulations and whatnot. So to answer your question, now that we're back and moving forward, Husky Market, I can tell you, won't be me, it'll be the next generation. We'll have to think about how do we create a model which fundamentally gives people choices and what they can eat, when they want to eat, when they want to go out and get the groceries, when do they want to take it back over break, all these things, does it in a safe way, that's responsible financially for the organization funding it. All those decisions will be very difficult, and truthfully, I don't have an answer to on most of those. But I have the full faith in the next generation to answer that question and the challenges of their time just as surely as our generation answered ours. So, thank you.
I think this is such a very important question, because when I think about food insecurity, I don't just think about hunger. So what I mean by that is, as an instructor, ever since we've returned in person, and even actually online, I want to kind of bring it back a little bit further than that, I have witnessed my students struggling more than ever before, and this hasn't just been in my classroom. And so I've seen a trend where more and more students are not performing as they did pre-pandemic. And so, we could sit here and say, oh, well, maybe it's, the remote modality, but now we're back in person. So it begs the question, what's going on? And I think that this is inevitably a structural issue, right? So food insecurity doesn't just make, it means so many things. It can mean that now you're working extra hours so you don't have as much time for your studies. It can mean that you're actually physically hungry and do not have the capacity, the way someone else who has had their nutritional needs met, that capacity in order to actually focus and study and prepare, do your work. And so I think the issue is so multifaceted, and as an instructor, we have to be on the lookout for signs. I never assume that a student is just disengaged or just disinterested or apathetic. If I have a student who seems to not be doing so well in class, my question often is okay, so what's your background, what's your story, what's really going on? And it's very sad, because as an instructor, that's kind of where as far as we can go. So the challenge for me has been trying to figure out how to re-engage these students, how to essentially deal with something that isn't within my roles and responsibilities. But as a human with a heart, it absolutely is, right? I care very deeply about people who are going through issues like this. I myself my family has gone through things, so they hit close to home. And what's more scary is that I don't know if all the instructors who maybe aren't first generation students, who haven't necessarily lived through kind of financial burdens, maybe they don't recognize the disengagement as food insecurity, right? So it's like, oh, that student, maybe they're just not, I don't know what's going on with these students, they're the pandemic students. And we have to really be critical about what pandemic students really means. It's housing insecurity, it's food insecurity, it's unemployment, it's increases in domestic violence at the home. There are so many different social issues that kind of like, it was like a grand slam, if you will, during the pandemic. And I would say that it's, while we're going back to normal, people's lives are not. The unemployment rates are still up. Food insecurity is still pervasive, even though things are going back to normal. So we have to be very thoughtful about how we frame the pandemic, right? And think about the extent of these issues, and realizing we may not have to wear masks anymore, and maybe we're not socially distancing, which I think is phenomenal for me. I'm a social being, we all are. I think it's really good to be in person, but we also have to remember that out of sight, out of mind, right? We have to keep it fresh in our minds so that we can continue to address these issues and not let them kind of get swept under the rug. So I think this is going to be an ongoing challenge to really recognize what do those warning signs look like in your classroom, and is it just apathy, or are there other structural conditions such as impoverishment, and the way that race and international status map onto these issues is so very significant. And so we really need to look at our students as well and think about all these different factors when we're really trying to assess some of the consequences that are not necessarily so obvious. They're kind of like latent. They're very latent, and it operates very covertly. And so I love that we're having conversations like this, because it's an indirect consequence that the students have to burden. So now you're food insecure and your GPA dropped. That means you can lose funding. And so this issue can be so pervasive. I mean, there are probably students that are no longer, unfortunately, a part of our campus, and a big reason why they were unable to be retained wasn't because they weren't dedicated. It wasn't because they weren't smart enough to get into one of the best universities in the country. It's simply because that hidden curriculum was far too difficult to be able to shoulder on top of the academics. So I would say for sure that's been a challenge, more so if first generation students were struggling before in retention rates, this has exacerbated that issue significantly. And I hope that we can continue to kind of come together as a community and brainstorm about really innovative solutions that can help kind of bridge these gaps and retain the students who are so worthy of being here and deserve to, graduate with those who are not food insecure as well. Okay.
I honestly don't know what I could say that could possibly follow that. That was really amazing. But since you mentioned international students, I will bring up one thing that happened in my experience as the campaign coordinator for the Food and Housing Equity Project. So I had a student, an international student, who was interested in getting involved in my campaign, and he really wanted to do a whole lot of things. He wanted to do a class project on the campaign, and he was asking me a lot of questions that I am ashamed to say I never even asked myself. He said, how do you work with international students here at UConn? And he said, do we have programs like this available for international students here at UConn? And we have such a massive, I think probably one of the leading international student populations in the country. And we rarely consider that in our line of work. And I think it's just something that, a bridge that hasn't been crossed yet, because if it is something we have a conversation about, I'm sure we will figure out a way to cross that bridge and meet those students where they are, and support our international student community, who is just as valuable as all of our Stores campus students and all of our regional campus students, and have the same experiences here at UConn as many of them. And we need to show them that and hear them and involve them in the conversation. But what I will say about student leaders here on campus that I have consistently been impressed about is the level of awareness of intersectionality that every single person here and beyond, and all of the student leaders working in this space have. We're not thinking that food insecurity is just one thing or just one type of people. We're thinking about all of the different little ways that food insecurity comes up in people's lives. We're thinking about the demographics it affects. We're thinking about the different ways we can solve the problems, education, awareness, different kinds of resource programs, donation drives. All of these different things that students do are so aware of the intersectionality of these problems. And that is something that's really impressive to me.
I just want to say I am so impressed too as like a sociology professor. That makes my heart so happy. I guess intersectionality has grown in terms of the awareness around it, and it's so important because it's as we talked about this evening, it's not a monolith, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all issue. And so in order to understand the complexity and nuances to, again, like reverse engineer, I think it's so very important that you brought up the regional campus students, our international students, and thinking about, okay, not only how do these issues look different, but two, how can we target these populations more effectively? Because one strategy that would work for outreach for one group may not be as effective for instance for another. We brought up, Ethan, you brought up earlier that some of the regional campuses don't have yet cafeterias, like places to eat. That I'm at the Waterbury campus, we would love to have a cafeteria, right? Like this is great. I think we've actually been thinking, we now have this place called Spirit Cafe actually that comes in a few, like, they're like a pop-up, right? And so I think having something that's so critical because the students may get there at like 9 o'clock in the morning and may not end their day until 4. And within like a 1 block radius, there's maybe 2 pizza shops. And there's like chips that you can buy inside at a vending machine maybe, right? And so we really want to think about, okay, the library there is excellent, like the Waterbury campus is excellent, and I haven't been to Stanford or some of the other campuses, but thinking like how can you study all day or complete these things, and what are the access to like these, even like purchase power or like free, like, you know, for food insecure students, they may not be able to afford those options anyway, so like we definitely have some homework to think about with what our solutions look like. How do we like actually tailor a solution to the Waterbury campus, given, right, some of the more complicated kind of administrative like things that need to be worked out, right? Like how do we actually get there? And I think that the solutions like the Husky Market is so innovative and genius. It's just like, okay, let's do like, it's almost like grassroots organized student organizing, and I love it. I think that that's really how a community takes care of a community. So excellent, yeah.
Yeah, so to kind of go off of what all of you have said, how do you plan to adapt your initiatives moving forward, and in what capacity do you hope to be supported by university administration? And what role do you think UConn as an institution should play in these future plans?
Someone else want to start?
Sure. So we were actually having a conversation the other day. Me, Ethan, Allie, and Alexis were in a conversation with, from USG, we're in a conversation with the University of Nevada, who has an amazing food insecurity infrastructure that has been built into their university program since 1987. And there are leaders in this space across the country that we can look at, and the practices that we can emulate and the ways that we can learn from them and grow and become better, because we need to institutionalize infrastructure here at UConn at all of our campuses that addresses food insecurity through a number of different programs. And just to mention what we spoke about with the people in, I think their program's called PAC Provisions, with University of Nevada, they have a food pantry. They have food pop-ups where they do where they give out groceries. They have something like the gift card program with partnership with Walmart. They have SNAP educational programs, different educational programs. They target food insecurity in such an institutionalized and impactful way that is so pervasive that, you know, the number of students that you miss when you're working in this space is much less. And you're able to provide for such a wide range of students who experience food insecurity by offering all of these different programs to reach them in a number of different ways. And I think that that's what we need to work on, right? We need to adapt, and not even adapt, we need to build from the ground up infrastructure like food pantries, like educational programs that fully and wholly addresses food insecurity, and that's not just the students' problem, right? That is something that is a whole entire UConn all hands in type of effort. That's not something that we could do by ourselves, and we will keep on trying until we get to that point.
I love the emphasis on the institutional aspect of it, because that is the crux of it, right? If we're going to be able to find effective programming and interventions, we have to really be able to assess what is the institutional nature of this. And my role as a grad student, I think not only about my students who are undergrads, but I think about my colleagues. And I think another really effective tool that we've been using, or that we can leverage, continue to leverage as a union, is collective bargaining, right? Sitting down with the university, getting on the same page about how can we work together to create a really ideal climate for our workers, who are also, right, play a huge role in servicing our students. Like, I look at it as like a family, right? Like, we're all interconnected, so we have to think about our role in this, and what are the different services and needs. And so this is something our union has, again, taken into consideration. We do a bargaining survey every time we're gonna do a contract, so about every 3 years, it can change the time frame. We will negotiate for a contract. And so before we do that, we send out a survey to our the graduate students that are part of the bargaining unit, and we ask them, like, what are your top issues? What are some things that you would like to see improved in our next contract? And we know time and time again that compensation and benefits are one of the most crucial. Take-home pay is huge, right? As a graduate student and vice president, I wear that hat to say this is something that we can definitely continue to work with the university and get on the same page with. We've talked to Kent Holsiger. He's been excellent. He's a really great advocate. He's the dean of graduate students, so he's been phenomenal in terms of really showing a real interest in the graduate students here and thinking, like, okay, how can we work together to better them? But again, then we have our undergrads as well. And so I think that there should be collaboration, really, between grads and between undergrads, and we can really work together as a collective unit to think about how can we interrupt this issue, and really have buy-in, again, from UConn as the institution, and thinking what are the pathways for success here, because they're certainly there. The resources are there, the interest is there. We just have to, I think, continue to kind of have a meeting of the minds and of passion around something that it's not just unfortunate. This is a human rights issue that we have to be deliberate about. It's a social justice issue that we have to really come together about and say, like, we, as UConn, we can do better and we want better for ourselves. And I love that the University of Nevada, you said?
Yeah.
Excellent. Never recreate the wheel. In my old job, they always said that. They said, don't recreate the wheel. If there are best practices out there, you find someone and you emulate them. You build on them. You reimagine them. And so I think it's also so wonderful that we're kind of resource pooling, and it's going to be really effective. And I hope that the leaders at UConn, if I could say something to them, that they continue to do this work with us, and that they leverage the resources and the educational tools to implement here at our university, and for our graduate students and undergraduate students as well.
Just a word about the food pantry. If UConn wanted a food pantry, all it needs to do is give the students a space to run it in. They don't need to pay anybody, they don't need to pay for food. USG in practice can do all of that. And in fact, it'd be 30 times cheaper than what we're doing right now. We can in fact pay for an entire semester's worth of food pantry, including the staff, the students, who would stock the shelves and distribute the food. We could pay salaries for them and still be able to easily sustain a food pantry. Money in this situation is not our problem. The problem specifically is the space. And all UConn needs to do is give us the space the size of a classroom to be able to service hundreds of students. We're very grateful and fortunate to have the funds to be able to do that here at Storrs. I also wanted to mention, this is really just a Storrs-specific solution, because it just simply won't help the regional campus in the same way it helps Storrs, is that all the infrastructure we need to address food insecurity in a meaningful way already exists at Storrs in our numerous dining halls on campus. We have one of the largest dining services in the country that's owned by the university itself, and it serves the most students, more than most other universities in the entire country. It's actually kind of crazy. because we have such a huge on-campus population of students compared to our total population. All of the infrastructure already exists. So another area of, of attack on this issue could be university subsidized or student government subsidized meal plans. So those communal plans I was telling you about, only 30 or so students, actually I think it's 30 to 50 students apply every semester for that program, for that meal swipe. The 30 is 25 swipes a semester. Students just don't know about it, they have no idea. And there is a barrier to entry to that. It needs to be granted by the Dean of Students office. So something that I've been thinking about and talking with some of the folks in USG is how can USG purchase 100, 200 of those 25 swipe plans, or something even greater if we could find a custom special for a commuter student who comes to campus a couple times a week, needs a couple swipes, maybe dinner and lunch, maybe more than 25, maybe 50 swipes a semester, 60 swipes a semester, 100 swipes a semester. How could USG just pay for that and have them go to that instead of a food pantry, which may be more, space prohibitive and resource prohibitive in terms of person power required to man the actual space, to staff the entire space. So just a couple ideas that I'm thinking about and definitely be passing on, and a huge part of this is having that transition to the next generation. Who's going to take the torch when we're gone? Because we can work as hard as we can, and we can run into walls and run through some of those walls, but most of the time it's going to be that next generation is going to be able to really get us to the finish line, which I think is truly possible. It's truly not a solvable issue that requires a state and federal-wide response. But here at UConn, we can make sure that a student is studying for classes and not worrying about where their next meal is coming from. That is a solvable task, at least while they're here as a UConn student.
And on the feasibility of the food pantry, which Ethan talked about, literally so many schools in Connecticut, like universities, already have food pantries. Like, it is very, very doable and something that we are actively working on in the student government space to make happen, because it is so doable, and it's just a few loopholes and barriers that we have to get through, like Ethan mentioned, to be able to do it. But empower the people that work around you, empower the people that are younger than you, that are going to be taking your role and doing the things that you do. Tell them how to do the things that you do so they know how to do it when it's their time. And lift up the people around you, because they're the ones who are going to be carrying this on after you leave, right? We're here for 4 years and then we're gone, but there's students in generations after that are going to care about these same issues and pick up the torch after. So that's just something I wanted to mention also.
I don't know if this is feasible, but I just had a thought thinking about the regional campuses. What if it was like a mobile food pantry? Like something that could go around to like the different campuses, like a truck or something. Again, feasibility, I don't know, like insurance, all of those things, liabilities, gets really complicated. And maybe it's just even having you said having workers who then can do deliveries and runs like that to the campus. That's probably more practical. But I think that in the programming and planning, oftentimes, when we think about complicated issues like these, inequality really just likes to reproduce itself unintentionally. It's kind of like a vine. It will just grow. It does its own thing. And so you have to really be attentive to these regional campuses, these international students, because as we continue to think about our programming, it's so easy for that to continue to be not the miss, but that's going to be probably, I would anticipate, the largest hurdle to overcome, right? Because I think when we think about our infrastructure, that is kind of the weak spot already. And so I think it's wonderful that we're making inroads here at Stores. And I hope that the regional campuses see what is happening here and they can continue to leverage and collaborate, right, to really make some effective inroads there.
Yeah, thank you. So we're almost out of time, so super quickly, one last question. How can we as college students at any level become involved in the fight against food insecurity without being performative?
Join your various student government / student union / student organization of doing cool advocacy stuff like Praxis does. Join the organization that are doing it right now. And when you're there, don't limit yourself to doing educational stuff. Limit yourself to doing true, honest, equity work of creating a program that will put money in the hands of students. So often, student advocates get lost in the bringing truth to power that we forget the power within ourselves, which is to be able to honestly take the resources we have and give them back to the students that gave it to us in the first place. And practice in USG, we take a fee every semester. For USG, it's $45. For practice, it's $5, and it's optional. We have to justify that. So when you're here, create a program that gives more than $45 back to the student we took it from in the first place. And truthfully, honestly, try to, when you're tired of like yelling at the administration or trying to get the administration to see your side on something, just remember that you can just do it yourself. You have the power. And we're so lucky to have 5 student governments across all of our regional campuses that are so powerful, that have, in USG sense, more than $1 million to be able to do awesome, cool things. So just do it yourself. And while you're doing it, tell the people upstairs what they need to be doing too. Don't get me wrong. It should happen together. And that'd be party list.
I guess I have 2 thoughts on this. As a graduate student, again, so I would say join the union if you're not a member already. Membership dues go towards programming like this, or not programming, but initiatives like this. Currently we do not, and I think this is a conversation for any grads who are watching or postdocs who are watching. This is a conversation we will continue to have as a union. We have our general membership meeting actually this Wednesday, and so we always report back on things that we've been engaged in, and I think this is a discussion that we are absolutely going to continue. And so that's something that's pretty passive, but if you are not able to, if you cannot afford the dues, you can still get represented in assistance from your union, even if you are not a member, just by being part of our bargaining unit. And you are always welcome to reach out to us, the Graduate Employee Union, if you do need assistance or help for anything, whether that's food insecurity or something outside of that. Sometimes I think students, we just don't know that there are actually resources out there or who to reach out to, and so that's a good start. I would also say that this might sound simple, but I think knowledge is power, and educating yourself and those around you can go so far. There may be people who are watching this tonight, or people we come across who are food insecure, and their fight against food insecurity would just be learning that they actually are food insecure and then getting some help for themselves. Because of this monolith, they may think, oh no, I shouldn't get that. That's for people who are much more poverty stricken than me or burdened than me. And you are a college student. You are kind of burdened compared to the rest of the population, possibly, on some level, right? Our demographics. And so I think that having these educational resources it's a passive way. Go online, do a search, watch a podcast. Even watching this, it doesn't take in a tremendous amount of effort per se or engagement, but it can have such a profound impact, because when somebody learns more about an issue, it gives you the ability to resist it rather than passively kind of be on the receiving end of the issue, or see someone else going through something and you don't quite understand the kind of the nature of that problem. By really better understanding this, I think that education is the first step to being kind of a social justice advocate. And if that's a big term and you don't want to necessarily wear that hat, human rights issues, education is a big part of that, to be able to understand the extent of these things. So I think those are 2 passive suggestions I have for being able to care more about the issue, even if you physically or monetarily feel that you can't make a huge difference today.
What I want to say is really big picture, and I think it echoes what our amazing keynote speaker mentioned earlier. Listen to what speaks to you. There will be so many people coming around and telling you about things, and things will catch your eye, and things will pull you and make you feel a type of way, and those are the things that you should spend your time doing, right? Yes, we're students, yes, we're here to get a college education, but we are not going to look back at our college time and I don't think at least be most proud of our academic achievements only. We will be proud of the things that we contribute to the spaces that we're in, the things we get involved in, the student leaders that we see, that we meet, that we work with, all of the accomplishments that we've made, things like Husky Market, those are gonna be the things that we look back on in our lives and are most proud of. And so if you feel like there's something that you could get involved in, something that like clicks in your brain and if you feel drawn to it, do it. Don't stop yourself. Don't say I'm gonna get to that next year. Like it's not, you have so little time here with so many opportunities, right? Like we are so saturated with amazing opportunities for student involvement. I see more every time I walk around campus and I just want to do everything. And it's really like the best experiences I've had like to date are my work here in these different student spaces, working with different student leaders who inspire me. So just do that.
Yeah, all right, thank you all so much. Thank you for your time and for your knowledge, and thank you to everyone who's watching. So this is all we have for today, and be sure to tune in tomorrow at 6 p.m. for our panel on Afghanistan. All right, thank you all, and have a good night.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.